I never thought a piece of paper taped to my gun sight would change the way we fought in the skies over Korea. My name is Captain James Jimmy Caldwell, and in the frozen winter of 1952, I was a 24-year-old fighter pilot flying the F-86 Sabre out of Kimpo Air Base just outside Seoul. The war had been grinding on for nearly 2 years, and up in the northwest corner of North Korea, in the area we called MiG Alley, American pilots were engaged in the most intense air-to-air combat since World War II. Every day, we'd climb into our Sabres and head north toward the Yalu River, where Soviet-built MiG-15s waited to challenge us for control of the skies. Every day, some of us didn't come back. The morning of January 15th started like most others at Kimpo. The temperature was well below freezing, and a bitter wind swept across the airfield, cutting through even the thickest flight gear. I stood on the flight line at 600 hours, watching the ground crew prep my aircraft, tail number FU-473. The Sabre was a beautiful machine, all swept wings and sleek lines, the most advanced fighter America had at the time. But beautiful didn't mean invincible, and we were learning hard lessons about that every single day. My squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Morrison, was briefing us in the operations shack, his breath visible in the cold air despite the struggling heating system. Morrison was a veteran of World War II, a man who'd flown P-51 Mustangs over Europe and knew more about air combat than anyone I'd ever met. He had deep lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun at high altitude, and his hands were steady as he pointed to the map of North Korea on the wall. "Gentlemen, today's mission is fighter sweep over MiG Alley," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Intelligence reports heavy MiG activity near the Yalu. They're getting more aggressive, pushing farther south. Our job is to engage and destroy enemy aircraft, protect our bombers, and maintain air superiority. Standard tactics apply. Stay with your wingman, don't chase MiGs back across the Yalu into Manchuria, and for God's sake, check your six constantly." I listened carefully, but my mind was partly on the modification I'd made to my aircraft the night before. It was something I'd been working on for weeks, ever since I'd noticed a critical problem with our gunsight system. The F-86's optical sight was good, but it had a fundamental limitation when engaging MiGs in the kind of high-deflection shooting that dominated combat up north. The sight was designed for straight-ahead shooting, but the MiGs rarely gave you that kind of shot. They'd cross your nose at high angles, forcing you to lead your target significantly, and the standard sight markings didn't account for that. I'd grown up hunting ducks in Louisiana, spending countless hours in the marshes near Lake Pontchartrain with my father and older brother. My father had taught me about leading a moving target, about instinctive shooting, about developing a feel for where your shot needed to be, rather than where your target was. "Jimmy," he'd say, standing in the pre-dawn darkness as ducks whistled overhead, "you don't aim at the bird, you aim at where the bird is going to be. That's the secret." That lesson had stayed with me through flight training, through gunnery practice, and now through combat in Korea. But I'd noticed something disturbing. Many of our pilots, especially the newer ones, were struggling with deflection shooting. They'd get a MiG in their sights, fire, and watch their tracers stream harmlessly behind the enemy aircraft. The problem wasn't their piloting skills or their courage. The problem was that the gun sight didn't give them the visual reference they needed for high-deflection shots. So I'd done something that would have gotten me laughed out of the squadron if anyone had known about it. I'd taken a piece of clear acetate, carefully drawn additional reference marks on it, based on my duck hunting experience and combat observations, and taped it to my gun sight glass. These marks showed where to aim for various deflection angles, giving me an intuitive reference that the standard sight lacked. It was crude, improvised, and completely unauthorized, but in my gut, I believed it would work. We launched at 0700, 6 Sabres climbing into the gray Korean sky. The landscape below was a patchwork of snow-covered rice paddies and frozen rivers, everything locked in winter's grip. We formed up in 3 two-ship elements and headed northwest, climbing to 30,000 feet. The Sabre climbed smoothly, the J-47 engine pushing us upward with reassuring power. My wingman, First Lieutenant Bobby Chen, held perfect position off my right wing. Bobby was 22, a Chinese-American kid from San Francisco who flew with precision and courage that belied his age. "Blue Flight, this is Dentist," the voice of our ground controller crackled through my headset. "We have multiple bandits, bearing 320 altitude Angels 35, range 40 miles. Appears to be a large formation." My pulse quickened. Multiple bandits meant at least 6 MiGs, possibly more. Colonel Morrison's voice came through, calm and authoritative. "Blue flight copies. Tally-ho, let's go hunting." We pushed our throttles forward and continued climbing. At 35,000 feet, the air was thin and bitterly cold. I scanned the sky ahead, looking for the telltale glint of sunlight on canopies, or the contrails that MiGs often left at high altitude. The visibility was excellent, the sky a deep blue that seemed to stretch forever. Then I saw them, 8 MiG-15s, flying in a loose formation about 5 miles ahead and slightly above us. The MiG-15 was a formidable opponent, in some ways superior to the Sabre. It could climb faster, had a higher service ceiling, and packed devastating firepower with its 37mm and 23mm cannons. But the Sabre had better high-speed handling, superior gunsight radar ranging, and most importantly, better trained pilots. Every engagement was a deadly chess match where small advantages could mean the difference between victory and death. "Blue lead has visual, 8 bandits, 12 o'clock high, 5 miles, Morrison called. "Blue flight, prepare to engage. Check your switch is hot." I flipped my master arm switch to on, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat. This was the moment when everything became crystal clear, when all the training and experience focused into a single point of concentrated awareness. Bobby moved closer, tucking in tight for the initial engagement before we'd split up to maneuver. The MiGs saw us and immediately split their formation, 4 breaking left, 4 breaking right. It was a standard tactic designed to force us to divide our attention. Morrison called, "Blue flight, engage left group," and we rolled into the turn, pulling hard to bring our noses to bear on the 4 MiGs that had broken toward the setting sun. The next 60 seconds were a confused blur of turning, climbing, and fighting for position. The MiGs were aggressive, reversing hard, using their superior climb rate to try to get above us. I stayed locked on one MiG that had made a mistake, reversing his turn too early and giving me a fleeting opportunity. He was crossing from my right to left at about a 60-degree deflection angle, maybe 800 yards out. This was exactly the kind of shot that was so difficult with the standard gun sight. I'd have to lead him significantly, aiming well ahead of his nose to account for his crossing speed and the time my bullets would take to reach him. In the fraction of a second, I had to make the decision. I focused on my improvised sight marks, the ones I'd drawn based on my duck hunting instincts. They told me to aim what looked like an impossible distance ahead of the MiG. I squeezed the trigger, and the 6 .50 caliber machine guns roared to life, the Sabre shuddering slightly from the recoil. Tracers arced out across the sky, and to my amazement, they converged right on the MiG's nose. I walked the stream back along the fuselage, seeing flashes as my round struck home. Pieces flew off the MiG's wing, and suddenly it was trailing smoke, rolling uncontrollably to the left. "Blue 4, splash 1, Bobby's excited voice came through. He'd seen my kill, but there was no time to celebrate. Another MiG was coming around hard, trying to get on Bobby's tail. I reversed hard right, pulling the stick back and to the side, the G-forces crushing me down into my seat. The world grayed at the edges as I pulled through 6, 7 Gs, the Sabre protesting but responding. I came around onto the second MiG's tail, but he saw me and broke hard left, presenting another high-deflection shot. Again, I used my improvised sight marks. Again, I squeezed the trigger. Again, the tracers tracked perfectly to the target, striking the MiG's tail section. The enemy pilot must have panicked because he kept his turn going, bleeding energy, and I was able to pull lead and fire another burst. This time, the MiG's engine exploded in a ball of flame. The pilot ejected, his chute blossoming white against the blue sky. "Blue 4, splash 2, Bobby called again, disbelief evident in his voice. The fight continued for another 3 minutes, but the remaining MiGs had had enough. They disengaged, diving away toward the Yalu River and the safety of Chinese airspace. We reformed and headed south, 6 Sabres against what had been 8 MiGs, and we'd shot down 3 of them without a single loss. 2 of those kills were mine, made possible by that piece of taped acetate on my gun sight. Landing back at Kimpo, I expected the usual routine: debrief, confirm the kills with gun camera footage, fill out after-action reports. What I didn't expect was the intensity of interest in how I'd made those shots. Colonel Morrison pulled me aside in the debriefing room, his expression serious. "Captain Caldwell, I've been flying fighters for 10 years, and I've never seen deflection shooting that accurate," he said. "Your gun camera footage shows perfect lead on both targets. That's not luck. What's your secret?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish about my improvised modification. "Sir, I made some modifications to my gun sight. Nothing official, just some reference marks I added based on my experience duck hunting back home." Morrison's eyebrows went up. "Show me." We walked out to my aircraft and I explained the concept while pointing to the acetate overlay. Morrison studied it carefully, asking detailed questions about how I'd calculated the lead angles, how I used the marks in combat, how quickly I could acquire and engage targets. Other pilots gathered around, curious about what we were discussing. "This is brilliant," Morrison said finally. "It's crude and unauthorized, but it's brilliant. You've essentially created an instinctive deflection sight using principles that any hunter would understand. Captain, I want you to document exactly how this works. We're going to test it, and if it checks out, we're going to get this or something like it on every Sabre in the theater." Over the next 2 weeks, my life became consumed with testing and refining what we started calling the Caldwell lead computing sight. The squadron's armament officer, Captain Ed Martinez, was a genius with mechanical systems and optical physics. He took my crude concept and worked with me to develop a properly engineered version that could be manufactured and installed on all our aircraft. The process was fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. We'd spend hours discussing deflection angles, bullet ballistics, and typical MiG maneuvering patterns. Ed would run calculations, I'd describe what I was seeing and doing instinctively in combat, and gradually we refined the concept into something that could be taught to other pilots. The key insight was that high-deflection shooting in jet combat was fundamentally similar to shooting moving targets in hunting, just at much higher speeds and distances. We conducted extensive testing using towed targets and gun camera analysis. Pilots who used the modified sight showed a dramatic improvement in hit probability on high-deflection shots, sometimes doubling their accuracy compared to the standard sight. The improvement was so significant that Colonel Morrison pushed the findings up the chain of command with unusual urgency. Meanwhile, I continued flying combat missions. On January 23rd, I got my third MiG kill using the modified sight. On January 30th, I got 2 more in a single mission. Other pilots in the squadron who'd adopted the modification were reporting similar successes. Word spread quickly through the fighter community in Korea, and soon pilots from other squadrons were visiting Kimpo to see this secret sight trick that was supposedly revolutionizing air combat. The attention was uncomfortable for me. I'd grown up in a small Louisiana town where you didn't brag about your accomplishments and you certainly didn't seek the spotlight. My father had taught me to let my actions speak for themselves, to focus on doing the job right, rather than worrying about recognition. But the Air Force had different ideas. By mid-February, I was being interviewed by intelligence officers, having my techniques documented for training materials, and being asked to brief senior commanders on the concept. The breakthrough came in early March when the Air Force's Air Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio got involved. They sent a team of engineers to Korea specifically to study the modified sight and determine if it could be mass-produced. Captain Martinez and I spent 3 days walking them through every detail of the concept, the practical application, and the combat results. The chief engineer, a brilliant civilian named Dr. Robert Hawkins, was initially skeptical. "What you're describing," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose as he studied our diagrams, "is essentially an analog computer for calculating deflection lead, but the human brain is already doing those calculations subconsciously for experienced pilots. Why do you need a visual reference?" "Because most pilots aren't experienced," I replied. "We're getting new guys straight from training who've never seen combat, never shot at anything that's actually trying to kill them. They don't have time to develop that subconscious calculation ability before they either get good or get dead. This sight gives them a reference point, a way to translate their instincts into accurate shooting much faster." Dr. Hawkins thought about that for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. You're essentially creating a training aid that allows pilots to develop effective techniques faster. That's actually more valuable than just improving accuracy. You're compressing the learning curve." Within a week, Dr. Hawkins and his team had designed a production version of the modified sight that could be installed as a field modification on all F-86. The new design incorporated the lead reference marks directly into the optical path using precision-etched glass rather than my crude taped acetate. It was elegant, durable, and most importantly, it worked exactly as intended. The official designation was an APG-30 lead computing sight field modification, but everyone just called it the Caldwell site. By late March, installation kits were arriving in Korea, and maintenance crews were working around the clock to install them on every Sabre in theater. The impact on combat effectiveness was immediate and dramatic. In April 1952, F-86 Sabres equipped with the modified sight achieved a kill ratio of 14-to-1 against MiG-15s, the highest monthly ratio of the entire war. Pilots who'd been struggling to get kills suddenly became effective, their confidence soaring along with their accuracy. The MiG pilots noticed the change too, becoming more cautious, less willing to engage in the close-quarters turning fights where the modified sight gave us such an advantage. Lieutenant Bobby Chen got his first kill in late April using the modified sight, a moment of pure joy that I was privileged to witness from my position as his flight leader. After we landed, he was so excited he could barely stand still during the debriefing, talking rapidly about how the sight marks had given him exactly the reference he needed to trust his instincts and take the shot. Watching his success felt better than any of my own kills had. By summer, the modified sight was being incorporated into all new production F-86s, rolling off the assembly line in California. What had started as a piece of acetate taped to my gun sight had become standard equipment on America's premier fighter aircraft. The Air Force put me in for the Distinguished Flying Cross, not just for my kill total, which had reached 11 by then, but for the tactical innovation that had improved the combat effectiveness of the entire fighter force. Colonel Morrison pulled me aside one evening in June as we watched the sunset from the flight line. The Korean summer was hot and humid, a stark contrast to the bitter cold of winter when I'd made that first kill. Morrison had a beer in his hand, unauthorized but overlooked given that we were off duty and on the ground. "Jimmy, do you understand what you've really accomplished here?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. "You didn't just invent a better gun sight. You proved that innovation can come from anywhere, from anyone, regardless of rank or experience. You took lessons from your childhood in Louisiana and applied them to jet combat over Korea. That kind of creative thinking is what wins wars." "I just wanted to hit what I was shooting at, sir," I said honestly. He laughed. "That's what makes it perfect. You weren't trying to revolutionize anything. You just saw a problem and fixed it using the tools and knowledge you had available. That's the definition of good engineering and good leadership." I flew my last combat mission over Korea in September 1952, having completed 100 missions and accumulated 12 confirmed MiG kills. I was rotated back to the United States, assigned to the Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. My job was to teach the next generation of fighter pilots the lessons we'd learned in combat, including the proper use of the modified sight that still bore my name. Standing in a classroom at Nellis, looking at eager young faces that reminded me so much of my own just a year earlier, I always made sure to tell them the full story, not just about the sight modification itself, but about where the idea came from. I'd tell them about cold mornings in the Louisiana marshes, about my father teaching me to lead a flying duck, about the importance of understanding principles rather than just memorizing procedures. "The Caldwell sight works," I'd tell them, "but it only works if you understand why it works. It's not magic, it's physics and instinct working together. Your brain is an incredibly sophisticated computer capable of making the calculations needed for deflection shooting. The sight just gives your brain the reference points it needs to do that job more quickly and accurately. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust that piece of equipment to help translate one into the other." Some of those young pilots went on to fly combat missions in Korea before the war ended in 1953. Some of them got kills using the modified sight. Some of them wrote to me afterward, thanking me for a piece of equipment that had given them confidence and capability in their first combat missions. Those letters meant more to me than any medal or commendation ever could. The F-86 Sabre served the Air Force for another decade after Korea, eventually being replaced by more advanced aircraft like the F-100 Super Sabre and F-4 Phantom. But the principles behind the Caldwell sight lived on, incorporated into more sophisticated sighting systems, eventually evolving into the computer-assisted targeting systems that modern fighters use today. Every advancement in weapons technology builds on what came before, and somewhere in that long chain of development, there's a piece of acetate that a 24-year-old captain taped to his gun sight because it reminded him of duck hunting with his father. I retired from the Air Force as a colonel in 1972 after 25 years of service. I'd flown dozens of different aircraft, commanded fighter squadrons and wings, and served in staff positions at the Pentagon. But whenever anyone asked me about my career, the story they wanted to hear was about that winter morning over MiG Alley, when a crude improvisation became a tactical revolution. Looking back now, decades later, I understand that what happened wasn't really about me or my innovation. It was about being in the right place at the right time, with the right combination of experience and need. Thousands of pilots had faced the same problem I'd faced with deflection shooting. I just happened to have a unique background that gave me a different perspective on solving it. And I was fortunate enough to have leaders like Colonel Morrison, who recognized good ideas regardless of where they came from, and were willing to push those ideas forward despite bureaucratic resistance. The lesson I carried forward from that experience was simple. Innovation doesn't require genius or formal education. It requires observation, creativity, and the willingness to try something different when the established way isn't working. It requires leaders who listen to their people and who value effectiveness over tradition. And it requires the humility to recognize that the best ideas often come from unexpected places. That piece of acetate changed my life and influenced the course of aerial combat in ways I never could have imagined when I first taped it to my gun sight. But more than that, it taught me that every person has unique experiences and perspectives that can contribute to solving problems. The kid from Louisiana who learned to shoot ducks had something to offer the sophisticated world of jet combat. The maintenance sergeant who worked on engines every day might have insights into reliability that engineers in air-conditioned offices would never consider. The young lieutenant flying his first mission might see something that veterans had stopped noticing. My name is Captain James Caldwell, and I was 24 years old when I used a duck hunting trick to revolutionize air combat over Korea. But the real story isn't about me. It's about the power of looking at old problems with new eyes, the value of diverse experiences, and the importance of leaders who create environments where innovation can flourish. Those lessons are as relevant today as they were in the frozen skies over MiG Alley in 1952.